Over many years in the financial industry, we have heard and seen horror stories of business owners who finally make over $1 million only to suffer the consequences of huge tax increases. Thankfully, you can avoid becoming another horror story because today we're going to be sharing exactly why your tax skyrockets after $1 million, what you should be mindful of before it happens, and give you tips on how to navigate this problem when it does happen.
I'm Ian Weiner. I'm a certified financial planner. This is Todd Watley. He's a certified elder law attorney. We should probably introduce ourselves in more of our videos here, but we're the owners of Generations Wealth Partners. We've helped clients all over the United States minimize their taxes, and we're going to share a few of those simple strategies with you today. Now, understanding how to minimize your taxes is a little bit simpler to talk about than it is to implement, okay? Especially if you're either making over $1 million or have $1 million plus saved. That's an easy intro number. Of course, there's some nuance to the situation, which we'll talk about. But it doesn't really require complicated tax and legal knowledge. You just got to think about things in the right way. And so we're going to give you some basic understanding of those concepts, run through some of those ideas, and show you how to minimize your own taxes. Let's get to the video. But before we do, let me remind you that this is not specific tax, legal, or investment advice. Todd is an attorney, but he's not your attorney unless you've signed an engagement letter with him. And I am a financial planner, but I'm not your financial planner unless you've
We're giving general information here.
we're given information here, and we have to have a little bit of fun
We do.
and play with that a little bit.
Absolutely.
So I want to frame this in two ways.
Okay.
One, income, but also assets. Okay?
Okay.
So kind of talking about business owners a little bit, but I'm trying to sneak two things into one. Is that okay if we give you
Sure.
if we give
Sure.
you double bang for your buck here? And then the other one is retirement. So I want to talk about that a little bit too.
Okay. Well, and let me just say, it seems like Congress really targets people, and for some reason, they've come up with this $400,000 a year in income.
I can tell you why.
Okay. Well, and so if you're making $1 million, you are well into what they consider to be rich, and there is a target on your back.
I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Our goal is not to be sensational, but at a certain point, we got to take them at their word and pay
and
attention
what they're doing. Yeah.
to what they say and what they're doing.
Mhm.
So the $400,000 number. This is kind of funny.
Okay.
Basically, most Americans don't make over $400,000 a year in income,
Sure.
and so that's why.
Okay. It's the minority.
It's the magic number.
But we've done shows, or will do shows, on how even people who don't think, if you're sitting there thinking, I don't make $400,000, I'll never make 400,000.
There
You
might be a
could
couple,
at least one year.
a couple gotchas.
Yeah, there's quite a few gotchas there.
In
Yeah.
there. Oh gosh, there's so much to talk about. So let me frame this a little bit here. And so you probably know this, but hang with me for just a moment. We have a marginal tax system. Okay, so the way that the brackets work is there's a certain amount of income that you can have in each bracket. So let's say you're a really high earner and you're making $1 million a year. You're going to be in the top marginal tax bracket, and that doesn't necessarily mean that every single dollar is taxed at the same rate.
Right.
So you have a top marginal rate, but you also have an effective rate. And that's what's important, that we have to kind of understand the distinction. And this is where we can play a little bit with these. And it matters in both situations, both, when you're earning income, if you're a business owner particularly, there's a lot that we can do here. Or if you're getting ready to retire or are retired, minimizing your lifetime tax rate is really what matters here. And we want to think about it in those terms. There's two types of tax planning. There's micro planning and there's macro planning, small and big, okay? Micro planning is what most people do most of the time. And this includes most tax preparers, even the ones that I work with. What they're focused on is, how do we minimize your tax bill this year? Now that makes sense, especially for tax preparers. I'm not beating them up, but it makes sense because that's what you're looking at. You're looking at this year, and they don't want you to be mad at them because they're just trying to do their job, right? And so most of the time, it's kind of like looking through the rearview mirror. It's important. We're trying to minimize issues there. But what we would argue is more important is, how do we minimize taxes over your entire life? This is long-term, big picture planning, and this is more like looking through the windshield.
And as far as bang for the buck, you get a lot of bang for that buck.
Yeah.
If you can look into the future and do things today, I mean, I've seen you work with clients, and this is not specific advice. I'm saying this is an example.
These are examples. Yep.
Someone who came in and on their current trajectory, they were paying $4 to $5 million in taxes at their death. And with just some fairly, I mean, not simple, but with some planning now, you're cutting that down to probably less than $1 million.
In a lot of cases,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, these are not exact numbers, but this is the kind of stuff. These are high leverage maneuvers, and this is why we talk about this. You know,
Say $4 million.
That's a big deal. And so this is just the general framework of how taxes work in the U.S. and capital gains are taxed differently. That's another video, and there's plenty of videos about how that works. But there's a couple things that we want to think about from this macro planning perspective. Okay, so let's talk about retirees first, because I think this is a tiny bit easier to deal with. So when you're getting ready for retirement, however close you are, or if you're already retired, there's a couple things that I think we need to talk about and frame this discussion. You know, most of the people that we work with who are approaching retirement or who are retired, the bulk of their assets are in tax deferred accounts. Okay, these are IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, 457s, etc. Okay, which means that when you contributed to that account, you got a tax deduction. So you lowered your current your income, your taxable income in the current year, with the promise that on a future time period, you're going to pull those taxes out and pay it at a different rate.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's two things that happen here. One is we defer the tax, and two, we defer the ability to know exactly what that tax rate is.
Yeah.
And so sometimes the way that we talk about it is you have a minority partner in those accounts, which is our Uncle Sam. Okay, and we're not anti-tax. We're pro-tax planning, being thoughtful about this. The promise is that when you retire, when you take money out of those accounts, you're going to be in a lower tax bracket than when you contributed. It's pretty straightforward tax bracket arbitrage is what we call it.
Yep.
So, okay, you're deferring in the 35% bracket, expecting to take it out on the 12% bracket. Here's the problem.
That doesn't happen.
It's pretty rare. It's pretty rare. You know,
it sounds great when you're 40.
It's yeah,
and there are
generational differences too. That's interesting. Like our clients that were part of the greatest generation, you know, the World War II generation, the Depression generation. Like this kind of works for them. Sure. They're like, you know, you give them a nickel, they're going to save 4 of them and figure out a way to make another nickel. You know, and that's just the way it is because they had to. They're rinsing their tinfoil. You know, and they still will. My grandmother was like that, you know, and so there's certain things that are behaviorally built in, but for folks who are in the baby boomer generation, and even Gen X that's beginning to get close to retirement, it hasn't worked out that way. And I'm not blaming anyone for this, but I think one of the key pieces is the tax system has gotten more complex. It's gotten dramatically more complex. And when I tell folks about some of the rules that apply to them that they didn't even know about, they get kind of mad sometimes, you know? And so what's happening is as these accounts grow, so does the tax burden. So does the potential future tax burden. And so if we're not thoughtful about it, it can create kind of a tax time bomb, really. And so what happens is there's a snowball effect that happens. When you retire, you have to start converting your assets into income, taking money out. Well, you have to create a certain amount of income to be able to live and cover your expenses. That's the purpose of it. But if those brackets shrink or the tax rates go up, then you have to take more money out of those accounts, and that to pay the tax, and that can cause a snowball pretty quickly. The other piece that we haven't talked about, and this applies to retirees specifically, is the taxation of your Social Security. I hate having to explain this to people because it's like, it's not my fault. I didn't do this, but it's like, you know, I'm the bearer of bad news. Don't shoot the messenger on this one. You know? And so it's like, oh, by the way, most likely your Social Security will be included in your taxable income. Isn't that nice? Now, this is a great test. If you have a financial advisor that you work with, and I didn't tell you that I was going to do this, but I always talk about this. Here's how you know if you have the right advisor for retirement. You ask them, don't do this in an email, do it in person in your next meeting with them, and don't tell them that you're going to ask, okay? If you're like 50 plus, this is something that you want to do. Or even if you're in retirement, you want to make sure that you're with the right advisor. You say, hey, how is provisional income going to affect my retirement? And you be quiet, and then you like practice it in the mirror a couple times beforehand. I mean, seriously, this is like, you know, and just see what they say. And if when you ask them that, if the color drains from their face, and then they begin to stammer a little bit and they don't have a really clear answer of how provisional income is going to affect your retirement, it's time to get a second opinion. I mean that very respectfully.
Or if they say, don't worry about it.
Yeah, or that's even worse. You know, if they brush it off and they don't explain it,
Hmm.
I mean, this is crazy. But the
It's a
reason
real thing.
it's a real thing, and the reason I've kind of made this the one question test for your financial advisor is because of how many times I've sat across the table with a prospective client. I ask them, "Hey, what's your plan to avoid taxes on Social Security?" And they're like, "What?" I'm like, "Well, what's your advisor's plan? What's the plan for provisional income?" And they're like, "I've never even heard of that before." I'm like, "Okay, well, let's talk about it." So provisional income is the calculation that determines how much of your Social Security is included in your taxable income. The main component is ordinary income. So ordinary income is income from your job or from your IRA or 401k withdrawal, 403b, 457. Rental income is included. Municipal bond income is included in the provisional income calculation. Capital gains and dividends. All of these get combined together plus half of your Social Security, and that determines how much of your Social Security is taxable. If you're not careful, it's only hundreds of thousands of dollars over your retirement. Probably not a huge deal, right?
Yeah, just a few hundred
I mean,
thousand.
look, you know, your advisor's a super nice guy. They've been your friend for a long time. Maybe play golf together. What's a couple $100,000 between friends, right?
Yeah, it's fine.
So I bring this up to say, you know, taxes in retirement is a little bit more complex than most people have
It's hugely, yes.
realize, and these are high leverage maneuvers. And so this snowball effect of you have to take, you know, if the tax rates go up, you have to take more money from your retirement accounts to be able to fund your lifestyle. And if your Social Security is taxable, that means your income is lower. You got to take more money out to fund the deficit of the amount of money that was your Social Security you were planning on going to taxes. This can snowball really, really fast. And you know, really between 500 and a million plus in retirement accounts is where this issue really explodes. And it can be dramatic.
Hmm.
You know, it can be millions of dollars over your lifetime if it's not addressed. And so, you know, I wanted to bring this up just to say that, you know, in retirement, income and taxes is a lot more complicated than people make it out to be. And we have to be proactive and plan.
Well, we always go back, I always go back, and I think it's a good analogy. People understand medicine quite well.
Mhm.
If in your 30s and your 40s you go to this doctor and that doctor just graduated law med school and they're a great general practice doctor, that's great.
Mhm.
But once you get older, once you get in your 60s and 70s, you start having multiple things going on, and if your family doctor's worth their salt, they're going to say, look, I really think you should go see a geriatric physician because they are especially trained in how to deal with all of these issues.
Mhm.
And people just say, oh, okay, that makes sense. I now need a different professional because I have different issues going on in my life and I want the best professional for those issues. People get that with medicine,
It makes
particularly.
sense. Yeah.
But for attorneys, that same thing applies, and for financial advisors, that same thing applies. Your financial advisor in your 40s and 50s may be an accumulation advisor. Great, fantastic. But once you hit your 60s and you start looking at Social Security, you're not in accumulation mode anymore. You're in I don't want to pay taxes mode,
Yeah.
and I need to convert my assets into income. And that takes a different professional many times. Your guy who was really good at that is probably not good at the 65 retirement planning. And that's where we've kind of focused our life on. We can help you accumulate, and honestly, that's not that difficult. But it's when you start pulling it,
Mhm.
taxes can devastate your plan, and you need the right professional just like you need the right doctor.
Well, and a lot of stuff is changing right now too.
Mhm.
And so one thing that I find is, you know, professionals that came up in the industry during a certain period, whether that's the 80s, 90s, you know, early 2000s, which was longer ago than some of us would care to admit, you know, they tend to stop doing real continuing education and they kind of do things the way that they've always done them. And in some ways that can be really good. In some ways that can be really damaging.
Mhm.
Um, and they a lot of times are just focused on what they've been good at for a long time, and that doesn't transition well.
That's not.
And you know, these are the higher leverage issues in my opinion, which is why we focus on them. Look, we can we can make a couple extra percentage points a year on average annual returns. There's some cool
Typically
things that
we
we can
can.
talk about that can help with that, and that's great. That's important. An extra 1% or 2% on $1 million is $10,000-$20,000. Great. But if we can do two or three different things and save you $4 million over your lifetime, the ROI on that is really, really tough to calculate because it's so good. And so, I think that's why we talk about some of these things so much that are a little bit outside of the norm of what most people expect from financial advisors. Most of them are like, oh, let's talk about stocks and bonds and what sector's hot and this, that, and the other. It's like, okay, that's fine. We could do all that stuff, but that's a small issue ultimately. How
In the
do
big
we,
scheme of things,
you
that's
know,
a very small bit.
making money is one thing, keeping it is way more important.
Yep.
And so that's what we really focus on. And so, this is the primary reason in retirement that tax skyrockets, especially if most of your savings are in retirement accounts, really 500 plus, but a million, million and a half plus. This can really be a compounding issue.
Absolutely.
So that about wraps it up on the retirement side of things. But be sure to think about some of these tips that we mentioned in this video. Ask that question to your financial advisor, and really be thoughtful about your financial planning, especially moving towards retirement. Now, these are just a few of the things that we want to talk about, and we recommend comprehensive review of this stuff and taking advantage of all of the opportunities that are available to you. Some of these we just don't have time to share on these videos, but we share them with our clients. And so we give them a full step-by-step walkthrough, personalized to their situation, to get their financial planning exactly where they want to go, maximize their opportunity, minimize their taxes. If you're interested in learning about some of these things and how they apply to your personal situation, click the link below. Let's have a conversation, and we'll talk about whether or not we might be the right fit. Now, here's the bonus.
Okay. Bonus time.
Little bit of bonus episode. I teased this at the beginning, but we started talking about retirement, but I said, hey, let's tease the business owner stuff too.
Okay.
So if you're a business owner, whether or not you're getting ready to retire, I think some of this can be interesting. Or if you're even a high income earner, we can talk about these things for both of these scenarios. We talked about in most of this video, we talked about how your tax skyrockets when you've saved over $1 million. But what if you're earning over $1 million? Well, of course your tax is going to skyrocket, and if you're in a high tax state, that's an even bigger challenge. In some states that can get up to, between state and local taxes, we can be pushing 50 plus 60% even in total taxes, which means, if you make $1 million, you're taking 400 home. That hurts my feelings.
That hurts my feelings.
And I hope it hurts your feelings too. And maybe you love it, and that's fine. Do whatever you want. But, so there's a couple of things that we want to talk about here, and a couple of potential sort of arbitrage opportunities that I think are important.
Okay.
So one is, there are different types of income, and those different types of income can be taxed differently. And so we potentially have the ability to affect this a little bit more if you're a business owner. We have more tools in the tool belt, if you will. But ordinary income is taxed at your highest marginal bracket. Okay, so that's where we get up in that 40+%, including state and federal. Capital gains, qualified dividends, they're taxed at lower rates, which can be really interesting. And if we're thoughtful, we can defer some of our income and take them as capital gains later on. And so that's something that's kind of cool that happens. The other thing that's a big advantage that business owners have is you can create a retirement plan. You can buy assets and depreciate them, and you can pay yourself in a couple different ways depending on how your entity is structured. And that's a way that you can really save quite a bit of money in taxes. There's some cool retirement plans out there that, based on how many employees you have, based on how much revenue you have, you can defer quite a bit of money and pay that tax later. Now, wait, Ian, you just said that deferring money and paying the tax later is a bad idea. It's a bad idea if you're not proactive about it.
Correct.
But if you're proactive and if you plan, we can defer at 40%, potentially take it out at 0% later on. I mean, this is a pretty good arbitrage opportunity. And if you're a business owner, you can take part in some tax credits. There's some cool stuff that we can do, and even some entity structuring things that we can do depending on how your business is set up, where you operate. That could be really helpful there. So when you're a business owner or a high income earner, it's the hardest thing is to be a high income earner but working for another company, because your tax deductions are really limited under the current rules. You can contribute to your retirement accounts, you can contribute to an HSA, but really beyond that, we're kind of trapped a little
Okay.
bit. And so some of the things that you can do is buy real estate and depreciate it if you're active in it. Someone's going to scream at me about that, and that's a fun one. But really, the idea here is if you find yourself in this situation, let's have a conversation about it, and just make sure that there's nothing that you're missing that you could be taking advantage of. Because if you're making, over $1 million, whether you're a business owner or not, and you could make a couple simple changes that could save a couple $100,000 in taxes,
It's huge.
that's worth the conversation.
Yep.
So there's a lot of nuance that goes into it when you're a business owner and even a high income earner. But we've got to look at the entire picture together and be thoughtful about it. So just a couple little bonus thoughts for business owners or high income earners. We talked about folks that have more assets and how that can affect them in retirement. But minimizing your taxes on your current income lets you save more for retirement or whatever financial independence looks like for you. So we should talk about some of those
Let's
things
do that. Yes. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
next time.